Well, I want to return to that shocking arson attack in Melbourne now, and joining me is my Sky News colleague, Sharri Markson. Sharri, thanks for your time this afternoon. I want to start by playing you Anthony Albanese's initial response when asked about this attack this morning and get your reaction. Here's what Anthony Albanese began to say as he addressed this attack.
Well, anti-Semitism is something that has been around for a long period of time, of course.
Sharri, what do you make of that response?
Well, James, firstly, I want to thank you for your strong comments in your opening editorial tonight. You've been such a friend of the Jewish community on this issue, and I completely agree with the sentiments that you expressed. But secondly, I was floored when I heard Anthony Albanese this afternoon make that remark at a press conference when he was asked about the anti-Semitic domestic terror incident, the firebombing of a synagogue, a busy synagogue in Melbourne. For him to explain this away, in a sense, by saying that anti-Semitism has been around for a long time, it is downplaying what we are going through in Australia right now, and it's simply not true. Yes, there's been anti-Semitism and persecution of Jews for thousands of years, but there hasn't been anti-Semitism in Australia. What we are experiencing now in this country is unprecedented. He's abdicating his leadership. He's washing his hands of the problem when he says a comment like, oh, anti-Semitism has been around for a long time. It hasn't in Australia. What we are all witnessing and experiencing and horrified by is unprecedented. I have never in my lifetime known the anti-Semitism that we've seen in the past 15 months that has happened under the Prime Minister's watch since October 7, 2023. James, that you and I and most Sky News hosts and every leader of the Jewish community has been begging the Prime Minister to take action on. We have been saying he needs to step up, he needs to do something about it, but instead he uses these soft language. He doesn't take strong enough action. Law enforcement isn't taking strong enough action. And so the anti-Semitic incidents that started after October 7 are not only escalating in severity and frequency, but they are now genuinely intimidating the entire Jewish community. And it's not just the Jewish community, it's everyday Australians who hate this as well.
Sharri, I want to ask you on a personal note. I mean, you're a member of the Jewish community. You're not just a journalist. How does it make you feel, especially when, I've listened to you week after week for months now talk about the problem of anti-Semitism, demand that authorities do more to address it, and yet it just keeps ramping up and up. How does it make you personally feel?
I'm devastated, James. You know, my Jewish identity was always important to me, but it wasn't something I thought about often every single day. It was just a part of me. But now, you know, you step out the front door, you're very conscious of being Jewish and what you can talk about in public and whether it's safe to go certain places. I mean, in the heart of the city, in Sydney and Melbourne, every weekend, pretty much, there are aggressive protests where they chant horrible slogans against Zionists. That's Jews who support Israel. That's the majority of Jews. So the streets in the heart of our cities are starting to feel like an unsafe environment, not to mention the university campuses. My heart goes out to the teenage Jews who have to turn up at places like the University of Sydney and deal with the anti-Semitism day in, day out. They shouldn't have to deal with that at that point in their life. It's been horrible. But, James, if you don't mind, I also want to pick up on something you said in your editorial. Just how often Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese criticise Israel. Yeah. It's this unhealthy obsession with criticising Israel. And they don't criticise Hamas that started this unprovoked war, that took the hostages, that Hamas could have ended the war at any point over the past 15 months if they just would have returned the hostages. Yet we hear this constant criticism of the Jewish homeland, and I think that's played a big role, James, in encouraging and emboldening the pro-Hamas crowds that we see in Sydney and in Melbourne. instead of toning it down and calming it down. We could hear Penny Wong stand up and say Israel has not just a right but an obligation to defend its people from terrorism. It has an obligation to try and bring its innocent people, including a baby and a child, home who are being held hostages. But she doesn't use that language. She criticises Israel all the time. The hostages are an afterthought. And so, you know, again, we just haven't had this action on shutting down anti-Semitism. Instead, our government has allowed it, in my view, to fester.
Sharri, I want to ask you this latest attack, and I mean, to me, this is different. We've seen some abhorrent things, right? But this was a synagogue set on fire, and not just that, but while people were inside, the level of fear now in the Jewish community and the sense that things are now starting to get out of control, how real is that now?
Look, I think this is, without question, the worst that we've seen so far in Australia. A synagogue set on fire while people were in it, people having to go to hospital, injured. You know, you can have whatever view you want on the Middle East, but you can't protest outside or set alight a synagogue. This is a place of worship. This is targeting people just for being Jewish, just for being Jewish. And again, you know, it comes back to leadership, because on Wednesday night, we saw a pro-Palestinian protest outside the Great Synagogue. We've seen a couple of similar protests in Melbourne outside synagogues. And so when political leaders don't stand up and say, you can't protest outside a place of worship, you can't protest Jews just for being Jews, these are Jewish Australians for no other reason than our religion, when we're not hearing that message, then it shouldn't be a surprise that the attacks and the aggression escalate at places like synagogues, and that there's a firebombing, horrific, devastating, heart-wrenching. You know, I've personally been so upset about this today, and Peter Dutton came out today and he said he wishes he could say this is unexpected or it came as a surprise, but sadly it's not, because this is the direction that we've been heading in here in this country. And, you know, you ask how we're all feeling. I've been trying to be optimistic. I proudly wear my Magen David. I refuse to be intimidated personally. I will speak out every day that I'm here on Sky News and stand up for the Jewish community, but also for Australia, because we want a safe, multicultural society. Yeah. We want that in this country. Our very values are inclusion and peace and tolerance and kindness. And what we're seeing on our streets doesn't embody that. Maybe the Prime Minister doesn't care because he was once a pro-Palestinian protester yelling into a megaphone. I've played that footage so many times, so maybe he struggles to speak out against this. But Australians hate what they're seeing. We don't want this lawlessness here. We don't want this racism here. It doesn't belong here. And you know, it's just devastating. And there is fear, there is anxiety in the Jewish community. It's been this way for months. There are armed guards outside Jewish schools. And you know, this is the reality we're living with in Australia in 2024. And I don't believe it would be this way. It's certainly not this bad if John Howard, Tony Abbott, Scott Morrison or Peter Dutton were Prime Minister. Absolutely. Or Julia Gillard or Kevin Rudd, by the way, because they wouldn't have stood for this either. Yeah.
Sharri, can I just say personally, and I know all of our Sky News viewers as well, greatly appreciate not just your clarity, but your continued courage in speaking so bluntly about these issues. I appreciate your time tonight. I know you're on a day off, but I really appreciate you speaking to us.
James,
this is so
again,
important.
No. James, well, again, I'm sure from every member of the Jewish community, we have to thank you and the other Sky News hosts, Chris Kenny, Peter Credlin, Andrew Bolt, Erin Molan, you know, all the Sky News hosts, Caroline Marcus, who have been so strong on this issue. Where would our community be without the Australian newspaper, without the News Corp papers, without Sky News? Because, you know, we don't have any other voices standing up for the community and for Israel. Moral confusion is reigning supreme, particularly in the Albanese government, but also in the media. And we have to stand strong and we have to call it out. And every Australian of all faiths has to say, we want peace, not this lawlessness, not this crime of setting alight a synagogue.
Absolutely. Sharri Markson, appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.